our cost structures coming to the next meeting. Councillor Walker.
Just like to endorse all of the comments that John made just now, and I'll add to them, because that goes to the bigger picture of why we're doing this. And I'm assuming that the reason that we're doing this in part is because of the people out there that are hurting around rates and rates increases. That's the assumption I'm making, and we know that the main driver of that is the disproportionate increase in capital value across Auckland and the demand that we're having in a number of areas, which in large part is driven by immigration, and we know that we don't have any control over that. And picking up on the comment that Councillor Watson made, we know the main structural problem we have in terms of funding and financing is the lack of money from the government and our council subsidising increasingly projects and especially transport that the government should be funding. So why are we spending so much money on rail when frankly it's Kiwi Rail and the Loop is part of the national rail system? Why are we spending so much money?
Councillor Walker, we're supposed to be talking about endorsing the approach and associated process.
Look, other people have had a chance to speak without you interrupting, Madam Chair, and I haven't spoken for hardly any length of time.
Order, Madam Chair. Point of order.
Get security, I think, over here.
Well, I think when we start talking about rail,
this is not superfluous. The fundamental structural problem we have that's not going to go away at this point is the lack of funding for the government and the fact that they're not on the table, especially around transport costs. That's what's driving all of this. It's the funding for rail and it's the funding for roads that we're spending money on that is effectively taking cars off the national system that goes through Auckland, the motorways and the like. That's where it's at. So that needs to be put on the table, and we need to have some broader context around this issue. Because if we don't have alternative sources of funding, and no, I haven't read that report, then all we're doing here is making short-term decisions that just dig us into a deeper hole. We'll be into a deeper hole, and we need to bring that pressure to bear on the government. Why is the government reducing our development contributions? Why are they doing that? And why are we not contesting that to a far greater degree? Because again, structurally, that is a far more significant ongoing decision in terms of funding than many of these other things that are on the table here. Simple. We also need to be having a conversation with Aucklanders so that they understand this context and not just dealing with, frankly, a number of things that aren't going to resolve the structural issues. And that's my real concern, that people in Auckland really do not understand significantly what is going on here. We have not told that story well enough. So unless we accompany this with some really good communications and a better macro picture in terms of where we're going to be at long term, again I say we're just digging ourselves into a deeper hole.
Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. I wonder if the mover and the seconder would like to add back a critical word in my eyes, and it's from the resolution of May, and that is the word alternative financing sources. Would they both be agreeable? It was actually per the resolution as read out by Mr Bishop. And I think that's important. Would the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Cooper accommodate, so it would read in A, mix of alternative financing sources.
Yep, fine.
Thank you.
Well, are you fine with that, Councillor Hulse? Ms Tyndall is.
Yeah, well that was what I think that's what the motion was at the beginning.
Yep.
So members, why that is important is, and maybe it hasn't been focused on at this point, but that's what we resolved in May. We were talking about alternative financing sources, not the predictable funding sources. And maybe it was just a slight oversight of Mr Bishop in his presentation. He read through the resolutions and he talked about exploring alternative sources of funding. Now, I don't want to criticise you there, Mr. Bishop, but we're actually not talking about funding, we're talking about financing, and I'm sure Ms. Tyndall could explain the difference for probably at least half an hour. But I want to stress, members, from what I'm hearing around the table, a lot of people are actually just talking about predictable funding, not alternative financing. We actually asked for something a lot more inventive than what we've been doing in the past. That's what the resolution of May was all about. So I'm emphasising alternative financing here, and I'm grateful for the two members to include that again or reinstate it, because there are a big range of financial instruments and tools available to us now, far more than we're tapping into. We're very conservative in that regard. We're quite pedestrian, in fact. It's good to have Ms. Tyndall on board, because I know her background has had considerable exposure to some of those alternative financing tools. Alternative financing tools, in my eyes, are not deferring quickly to that quick flick of core strategic assets. It's not that.
No.
Now, a lot of the defensive argument here today has been the pushback on that. In my eyes, that's not what we're asking for. That's so easy and pedestrian and predictable and average. And we need to be a lot better than that in how we finance the city as opposed to fund the city. It would be quite ridiculous to cut your nose off, to cut those high yields off that we get out of the airport that underpin so much of our program. It would be just absurd. And look at the capital gain, the capital value uplift on just the example of the airport in the last 2 years alone. Exactly. It's phenomenal. Exactly. And Councillor Walker just reminded us of the place of tourism and the linkages between that asset, the airport, and its ongoing value to not just Auckland but to New Zealand. I arrived as a councillor in late 04, probably 05 at North Shore City, and it had just flicked its core underpinning asset of its interest in Auckland International Airport. And it embarked on some wastewater works. But it quickly had projections of 9% rates increases within a matter of a couple of years. Yet the promise was, flick that and you won't see this again. But it was just a naive response. It was an easy win at that time. But did it have life? Did it have a long life benefit? No, it didn't. We were back to business as usual, rating the ratepayer, because it was just a dumb funding response as a smart and not a smart alternative financing response. So alternative financing, it is at our disposal now. Now, that might look like there is a lot of international money floating around at the world. They can't find homes for this international money. It's so competitive. Alternative financing instruments and tools are being developed daily, weekly in the finance sector. There's so much competition to place money. There's just hundreds, there's trillions of dollars of money that has to be placed around the world. All these pension funds from all the rich nations and the developing nations, they've got to place that money. Now, it might look like somebody might make us an offer, an extraordinary offer for, say, 135 Albert Street. We know it's on our books probably at the moment for about 150 million. They might say, we'll give you 250 or 300 million and we'll give you the building back in 30 years. But in the interim, we'll expect a premium yield. Instead of 4 or 5%, we would like an 8%. And you will guarantee that, but at the end of it, and we will have placed our money, because we're under pressure to place our money from our pension funds in New York or Amsterdam, wherever they're coming from, but we will give you the building back in good condition after 30 years. That's the sort of financing deals that are being done around the world now, members. And why do they look to governments and strong local governments like ours first? Because they know that we will still be there. We won't be liquidated like so many of the property companies that they're obliged to deal with. We will be a preferred customer to be treating with financing tools like that. So, members, alternative financing is very different to a lot of the simplistic offerings that have been put on the table here today. I don't want to dismiss your contributions, but they've been pretty average.
As opposed to yours, Councillor.
Right.
Thank you,
Wait,
Councillor Darby.
No, I'm just, look, I did preface that with a somewhat of a respectful
This has been
apology.
an outstanding speech in contrast.
I did preface it,
Wow.
but the team are going to be looking at alternative financing, not just hocking off assets.
Right.
That is just so predictable. So, members, there are things before us, we just haven't seen them yet. Hopefully in this paper, our staff will bring to us genuine alternative financing rather than quick fix cash up options.
Thank you for reminding us about that. I did say right at the beginning of the meeting, however, that we weren't actually just talking about, everyone's jumped to sales, you're quite right, and that's not exactly what we were talking about. It is alternative
Madam
funding
Chair, just point of
sources. We actually now have Councillor Filipaina, Councillor Wood and Councillor Clow and Councillor Stewart.
Can I just
can
point
I
of
just say,
clarification on the
councillors,
issue? Point of order, Madam Chair.
Councillors, I was at a meeting recently of councillors who actually said the problem is the chairs don't cut people off and they allow everyone to speak and our meetings go on and on and on. I wish some of you would come and sit in my place sometimes and try and keep the meeting going.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
If I stopped the meeting now, I'd be in real trouble.
Oh, point of order, Madam Chair. Just a
Councillor Brewer.
clarification over what Councillor Darby's just raised about the previous minute focusing on alternative financing sources. I just wonder if that's been misrepresented as
Point of order,
our
Chair,
point of order
I just
allows.
want to clarify whether it's a point of order.
Well, it is, because I'm asking whether a position has
asking the
been
Chair,
misrepresented.
Because I'm getting indications that it's not
Point
a
of order is to be heard in silence, Madam Chair. So are you going to,
That's why
am I
there's a
allowed my
point of
point of order, or is Councillor Filipaina allowed to talk over it the whole time?
Point of order.
What's his point of order?
Is clarifying whether that is a point of order and that is legitimate.
Councillors, the report is called Review of Alternative Sources of Funding. Okay.
Well,
Financing.
Madam Chair, the minute that was proposed, Councillor Darby gave the impression that it was that we passed on in May about financing sources. The minute that I'm reading, page 18 of our May 7 Budget Committee minutes, talks about agree to undertake a review of Auckland Council's mix of funding sources. It goes on, maximise the return on Council's investments and exploring alternative sources of funding. It does not talk about refinancing. So I think it's important to actually reflect what the minute says, and that is around funding sources. I hear what Councillor Darby is saying around financing, but the minute that he says existed does not exist. It focuses solely on funding sources.
So is it my turn now?
Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you. Chair, it was actually quite good listening to the potential mayoral candidate to my left. It'll be interesting to see how he gets on the south side when he ends up talking about partial and whole sell-off.
How will you get on about 16% rate increase?
Well, and I mean, it's interesting.
How will you get on?
It's interesting, Chair, that this is the first time in 5 years that he's interested in Māngere o Tāhuhu. First time in 5 years. And I wonder what the UAGC was going to be with some of his colleagues around this table.
Can we talk?
Yeah, I think it was 700, 900. Let's see what happens and gets reported on that. Chair, look, clarification question first. The clarification question I have around this particular work is that I'm hearing partial whole sell-off of shares. Now, Is that what we're getting back as a recommendation? Because that's not my understanding. My understanding it is not going to come back, but that's what I'm hearing. So I just want to clarify that that is not coming back as recommendation